We're going to call this meeting to order. It's 5:01. For roll call, please note we are missing John Marriott. And you may notice that Mr. James Wood's not with us. He had to tender his resignation from the board due to changes of positions. But outside of those two, everyone else is here with us, 3 virtually and 3 in the room here. All right. First thing up is approval of minutes. I know we've got one edit to the minutes under board members present. We're missing James here. We need to add that. I would entertain a motion to approve as amended.
Motion to approve as amended. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments on the minutes? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next up on our list here is public comment. I've got 2 in the room. I may have a couple online. I got 2 online. We'll start with the ones in the room. Oliver Peace.
Hey, name is Oliver, live in Superior. There's no public comment at the end of meetings, so what I'm referring to now is kind of what happened in the last meeting. So I wanted to touch base a little bit on kind of a little bit of shade that was thrown on ADSB data and talking about how the FAA operations numbers are the only official source. While not disputing that, I wanted to talk real quick about the advantages of ADSB data and how utilizing that could benefit the airport. The FAA reports on the number of operations in a few categories such as air carrier, air taxi, GA, and military. These numbers are recorded and reported to the FAA while the tower is staffed. Nighttime operations are estimated and added onto the total operations before reporting. I believe it's something like 3% added onto the daytime number. These numbers are then available to the public around the 15th of the following month, which is a lot of lag time, especially when you're considering some of the DNR requests based off of these numbers. I think this is where the ADSB data can come in. The beauty of ADSB data is that it's public, real-time information broadcasted from the airplanes itself. ADSB data can be purchased from third parties, retrieved for free from some third parties, or gathered from homemade professional receivers. From this data, operations can be counted, and this data contains a wealth of additional information, which is way more than just the FAA numbers. The runways used can be gathered, the type of aircraft, type and category of the aircraft, altitude, speed, you name it. And because it's broadcasted 24/7, it doesn't rely on staffed towers on site. As this information is broadcast in real time, operations and flight mix can be reported in real time, high accuracy, and not just estimated. Even if you regard the ADSB data as unofficial numbers, until the FAA numbers are received, even if they are less accurate, I think it would be a win. So my ask from you all is to embrace this ADSB data more as it is a blessing to us. We could report on operations numbers and runways used in real time 24/7. We could also utilize this information to make more data-informed decisions, which is often missing from these meetings as well. It's already utilized by the likes of air traffic controllers, pilots, search and rescue operations, as well as to analyze and learn from aircraft incidents that occur from time to time. So let's embrace it ourselves as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. Brad Walker.
Good afternoon, board. It's nice to see everyone. Brad Walker, Superior. I was looking over the agenda tonight, and I just want to give kudos to staff and the director. I think the outreach, I forget what item number it is, but the communications plan is going to be very helpful to everyone going forward. It's clear, it's concise, it's straightforward. I think we've had bad communications over the last few years in a lot of respects. And this will help clarify that and clear that up, and it'll be really helpful. And I also want to give kudos to the flight schools as well as the board and the airport for trying to advocate for a higher pattern altitude. Thank you. At 1,000 feet, I think that'll be helpful to everyone, and that's good progress. And I applaud the board and the airport and staff for being proactive and trying to make some voluntary changes. Thank you very much.
Brad. All right, we're gonna go to our first online comment.
All right, Randy Johnson, you should be unmuted.
Randy, you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can, go right ahead.
Okay, sorry, it's hard to figure out. I know it says I'm unmuted, but then it looks like I still have to push the button. Hi, this is Randy Johnson from Lavers, south of Chatfield, just on the west side of Highway 85. I'll do my normal. I wrote down 521 airplanes last month. These are mostly training airplanes. I had originally, for a little while back, I was mentioning I was writing down jets and all that. I stopped writing those down. I submitted 15 complaints to Centennial and 4 to Rocky Mountain. I still want to say most of the planes are being pretty good about flying, trying to stay higher and flying over the open space. I want to repeat that. And I know I repeat it every time, but I just still want to let you know that. And actually, I know I put in my notes that I even mentioned at Centennial that a lot of the Rocky Mountain planes, I start getting them flying at night. Or maybe I notice. I know I have them in the daytime too, but when it starts turning dark, I get planes. I say back to back, but they can be 10 minutes apart or a little further, but it seems like there's one and another. But uh, I think that's all I have. I appreciate you guys letting me call in and giving input from farther away. And I do, like I said, I do think I say the same thing that the other person said, that I think you guys are the effort that you guys are making is being noticed.
Thank you, Randy.
All right, next, Carolyn Fardman, you should be unmuted.
Carolyn, I live in Westminster, Jefferson County, and I'm here to address the VNAP and how it needs to integrate safety considerations as outlined in HB 24-1235. RMMA has unique characteristics that demand careful evaluation when developing this plan. RMMA operates in a high-density altitude environment, making it more challenging for aircraft to climb to safe altitudes. This issue is compounded by congestive, repetitive training operations where many aircraft remain below 1,000 feet due to frequent takeoffs and landings, an exception to the FAA's 1,000-foot rule for congested areas within that pattern around the airport. Over half of RMMA's annual operations consist of repetitive training in the pattern around the airport, concentrated over the same residential neighborhoods and schools. The south pattern extended zone on the VNAP, shown in yellow and in the form of dotted lines, should not be an option for repetitive flight training. This extended pattern reaches south of 100th Avenue, outside the airport's designated influence area, and over schools such as Wayne Carl Middle School and Lucas Elementary, which are considered incompatible land uses according to FAA guidelines. Schools are particularly vulnerable as students and staff may struggle to respond quickly in an emergency. Also, RMMA had a wildlife conducted and identified the Great Western Reservoir and Stanley Lake as hazardous wildlife attractants. These are shown on the VNAP. These hazards are defined as incompatible land use, according to the FAA. The Great Western Reservoir is located within 1.25 miles of the airport and directly beneath and near the VNAP's south traffic patterns. According to the FAA, 78% of bird strikes occur below 1,000 feet, precisely the altitude range where these training operations take place. And waterfowl, which represented 99% of species at the Great Western Reservoir, are considered significant aviation hazards. FAA guidance recommends maintaining a 5,000-foot separation distance between the nearest airport operations and hazardous wildlife attractants, a standard that RMMA is not meeting with this VNAP. Under Grant Assurance 21, airport sponsors are obligated to prevent land uses and operations that are incompatible with aviation safety. Allowing these operations over high-risk areas compromises this obligation. In addition, Grant Assurance 22I means Jefferson County Commissioners have the authority to prohibit or limit certain aeronautical activities if necessary for public safety. Given this data and guidance from the FAA, the VNAP should include avoiding repetitive training operations on the airport except in an emergency. At the very least, there should be no opportunity to extend the primary pattern beyond airport property, given RMMA's unique characteristics. The community is counting on you to keep us safe under these FAA guidelines, which are mandatory for airports who receive AIP funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other online comments?
None.
Oh, we're not at full time. Any other comments in the room? All right, we are closing public comments and we will move on to the agenda. Business item, House Bill 24-1235, outline and draft for discussion, second reading.
Go to the next slide. All right, so reduced aviation impact on communities. This is the second time we've been going through the voluntary noise abatement plan that is in front of you today. Centennial, Boulder, Erie, and Longmont airports have published their noise abatement plans for compatibility with House Bill 24-1235. And in review of those policies, it appears that Rocky Mountain's Metropolitan Airport noise abatement plan will be more closely following APA's than Boulder's, Erie's, or Longmont's. Next slide. In comparison, there's a table here that I provided that shows two particular parts of information that are applicable to the VNAP. One is touch and go operations. The other one is hours of operation. And I've had all 5 of the airports covered by the House Bill 24-1235 included, so you can see how the different VNAPs compare for those 2 items. I don't necessarily need to repeat what's in front of you. However, there is a distinct difference between APA and BJC's use of touch and go operations and how those policies are written versus how Boulder, Erie, and Longmont are written. And the hours of operation are slightly different. However, the concepts remain the same for those airports. Excellent. We received a couple different feedback points on a couple different issues, and I put those in front of the slides for you here today. They talk about touch and go operations, hours of operations, and some other type of things the airport could potentially do to assist with the VNAP. For touch and goes, it requests the prohibition of those entirely. For hours of operations, it suggests operations be limited between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. and for the airport to encourage training at CFO and Greeley. When it comes to touch and go operations, I do understand that there is concern from the community about how that works for the airport and how those sustained operations can impact the community. It's not feasible for the airport to prohibit touch and go operations it's entirely, even if this is a voluntary noise abatement program, the issue becomes compliance. If the airport were to establish policies and procedures in the VNAP that the pilots would not treat seriously, it compromises the entirety of the VNAP. So we want to have a policy procedure that we're implementing for the VNAP that is realistic and representative of what pilots can obtain and what's realistic for the aircraft to perform. Touch and go operations as a whole have not been strictly prohibited on a regional basis. And as you've seen, APA, which is Centennial, and BJC are the same in regards to how those touch and goes would work. For hours of operation, the draft VNAP includes provisions to encourage higher and steeper approaches and to help minimize noise impacts from approaches into the airport. Full stop taxi backs are essential for certain training maneuvers for pilots to conduct, and they're not feasible to prohibit. They would conflict with FAA regulations. Even on a voluntary noise abatement plan, we need to be realistic of what pilots can and cannot do and what they would do. As a voluntary noise abatement plan, it's necessary for us to respect and understand what pilots would treat as realistic to ensure their compliance. The airport does support flight education at other airports, specifically CFO, which is Front Range Airport or Colorado Spaceport, and Greeley, which is GXY. These airports should be used by flight schools when possible. They certainly are underutilized, and it would be nice for them to go there when they can do sustained top and goes or other type of operations here at the airport. We can't tell pilots where to go. We can't tell pilots what to do, but we do remain committed to working with those airports to find ways that we can shuffle some flights to them where possible and we're able. And we'll continue with the next two slides.
You mean as far as the,
Well, that's fine. No, that's fine. In the slides, you do have the copy of the voluntary noise abatement plan that was provided in November 13th, 24. And there's public comments in relation to the dotted lines that are on there. The dotted lines for the VNAP are indicative of FAA's Joint Order 7400.2P. They are not indicative of what we would expect pilots to fly for the traffic patterns of the VNAP, but they are realistic traffic patterns that the tower might put planes onto. So it's shown as a comparison of where planes might be in the air versus where we're actually asking pilots to go. And I know Ben's pulling up the slides so you can see kind of like that is. And then you can go to the next page, it shows that map with the dotted lines for 7400.2P. I didn't make any changes to the VNAP at this time. I'm still collating other changes. We've had a couple others come in since the publication of the agenda that are not worked into this presentation. So in January, we'll come back with the next iteration of this, which would be the final one theoretically that would go before the Board of Commissioners for final approval. We can go on to the letter. All right. When we had some public comments about 1,000 feet altitude, traffic pattern altitudes, inner altitudes, and 1,000 feet. And I think it's important for us to realize that for some reason, through historic practice, the airport's had an 800-foot traffic pattern altitude since at least Stapleton's construction prior to its move to Denver. Since that hasn't been corrected by the FAA, what the airport is asking for here is for us to try to look at that issue and recommend to the FAA that they evaluate that traffic pattern altitude and adjust it to what is the standard traffic pattern altitude for all airports in the country of 1,000 feet AGL. There is not necessarily any reason why the FAA should be able to do this. So I want to walk through the presentation here of the letter, and then we could talk in detail about the letter should we want to do so. So we want to talk about how raising the traffic pattern altitude increases the pilot's ability to make increased decision making. 200 feet may not sound like a lot, but 200 feet is a 25% increase in the actual traffic pattern altitude. It goes from 800 to 1,000. That's a pretty significant increase in altitude. And it's something that we would hope the FAA would recommend, or at least understand why we are recommending it to them. It does increase decision time to a total of 6.9 seconds, which also does not seem like a lot, but every second does matter. The higher traffic pattern altitude does extend the emergency glide distance by about 1/3 of a nautical mile, which also does not sound like a lot, but it is at least more than what they currently have today. Yeah, go ahead. For consistency, aligning BJC's traffic pattern altitude with the national standard of 1,000 feet AGL could reduce altitude errors and improve situational awareness. It both minimizes ambiguity for the local system and it fosters compliance with the national airspace system. Like I said, most airports are at 1,000 feet. For whatever reason, we're at 800 feet. Standardizing the traffic pattern altitude decreases the pilot workload. They don't need to remember that we're flying at a different traffic pattern altitude. And it's more predictable for pilots flying from other areas, so they would understand what our traffic altitude is. So what I'm asking here today is a couple things. One, I would like the community, for either airport users, stakeholders, community members, airport board members on your own, if you so choose to do so, submit a letter similar to the one that I'll be providing you that demonstrates our collective advocacy for increasing the traffic pattern altitude to 1,000 feet. It's only together that we're going to be able to convince the FAA that that's necessary. And I think it's important for us to take that step together. The airport can do this letter on our own. If the board would like to recommend that the BCC also send us some letter, that is up to the board's prerogative to do so if they would like to do so. The letter itself goes into detail about the history of the traffic pattern altitude and why and where it came from. It provides the same details that were in the presentation about 800 to 1,000 foot AGL. And talks about glide distances and provides data and charts for why that might be necessary. I think it's important to understand that we're dealing with traffic pattern altitude and in-route altitude. as a safety measure, there may be side effects to increasing the altitude that are related to noise. However, the FAA will respond more directly to safety concerns with traffic altitude than talking about noise. And so the letter is written in a way that is safety focused and not focused on other issues. You can review that letter. You can provide comments and recommendations and changes. And as you would do so, it wouldn't necessarily come back before the board for decision on a final format. It would be up to individual people to take the kind of content that's in that and submit letters like that if they would so choose to do so.
So I'll comment on this letter because I think taking feedback and what we've heard in here was this is one of those instances where this advisory committee can have impact. And it's one of those things where everyone seems to agree that this is a win. If you go from the 800 to 1,000, there's more positives than negatives that come out of it. And this is just one of those bottlenecked issues where for whatever reason, we just can't get the ATC to agree. And so providing this letter and building out this letter, is a step of saying, hey, community, this is a chance to participate. This is a chance for us to add some things together to work towards something that we think we can achieve and something that we can accomplish. For those online too, I'd add any feedback. I know we got a couple edits that were recommended from Mr. Wood to add around FAA and I think Eric and I talked about adding just a couple of those little nuances, maybe not everything that was sent, but I would like to see us recommend that the Board of County Commissioners adopt and send this letter on their behalf. We don't have the authority to do that, but we do have the authority to put that ask in front of them. So, committee members, any other thoughts on this letter? Go right ahead.
Tell me how we do not have the authority to do that since we don't even have any bylaws. Why can we not sign this letter as the advisory board?
So my understanding on that issue is that as an advisory board, you can't speak directly for the BCC. When you send a letter, you'd be saying what the BCC would say. So in this case, your recommendation to the board as advice to the board would be, we're recommending that you, the BCC, send a letter of this type of format out. It does seem kind of odd that you wouldn't have the authority to do it, but that's the way the county is structured. And so the county BCC reserves the right to do that on their own prerogative. And so you would provide the advice to do so. It'd be up to them to do so.
Alternatively, could we simply ask the commissioners to allow us to send a letter? I think that I'm very much in favor of the letter. I think it makes sense. I'm surprised the FAA didn't address it when DIA got moved, but that said, I think the letter makes perfect sense. It's well written. I would rather see it come from us with permission from the county commissioners. I think it would have more impact. Since that's kind of our role, but that would be my suggestion. Regardless, I'm very much in favor of sending the letter in whatever format we need to follow.
Do you have a comment?
I don't. Suppose the motion could be made to provide either, present the BCC with both options, communicate the preferences from the AAB to send the letter themselves, then get the BCC the request to either grant the AAB authority to send the letter with your approval, obviously, from the drafting.
No, that's fine. Is that the recommendation? What would you?
So I'll look to the board. What I'm hearing is that what we would like to recommend is for the Board of County Commissioners to authorize and or sign on to this letter in conjunction with us to go to the FAA. And we would need a motion to say as such, and maybe leave it and or open-ended so that the Board of County Commissioners will not have to play too much back and forth, and we give them the option to do what they want to do. I think at the end of the day, we want to get this letter out there, whether it's us or whether it's the Board of County Commissioners. So a motion that allows for that flexibility, I think would be appropriate if anyone would like to make it.
So
Is that a second, John?
Well,
Online?
it is. I think in a perfect world, the letter would say something to the effect of, we as the Airport Advisory Board, with the support of our governing body, the county commissioners, send the following letter. And I think in a perfect world, that would show a unified approach and would have some good impact.
Since we're now discussing a motion that's on the table, I think it's important that we we hand the county commissioners a finished letter, not leave them to make any decisions. They can always come back and say, well, we want to change this and that, but it's a pretty clear cut issue, and I think we can word it appropriately.
With that, are there changes you'd like to see within the letter as it stands now?
I have no changes that I need to see,
Does anyone have changes within it as it's drafted?
other than from I to we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion or clarity points? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now that the motion's off, I'll encourage all those listening, those in the room, this is a letter in a format that you too can take back to your authorities, to your groups, and put on your own letterhead. We gave a draft, we gave a template, and others can use this in solidarity with the airport board on this, so. Okay. Should have brought my laptop, navigating this on the phone is tough. Community engagement plan.
They make printers.
All right, community engagement plan.
Okay, so one of the topics that we've heard a lot about at the airport is our ability to communicate and how we reach out to the community and talk more about the airport, how we interact with the community, and what things can we work together with. And so one of the things we've been working on is the strategic communications plan for the airport. And what we have before you today is a skeletal framework for what that community engagement plan kind of looks like. And so we'll start with slides, and you do have a copy of the completed skeletal framework in your packet. If there's things particularly in the skeletal framework you'd like to discuss, we can. Otherwise, I'll proceed with going through the slides. So the purpose of the strategic communications plan is really to align RMA's mission, values, and airport goals and how we would communicate those. How do we enhance stakeholder and community partnerships and relationships, and how do we ensure a consistent and proactive impact with the communications that we deliver? So the approach is really to develop and implement a strategic marketing communications practice. We want to use a diverse set of tools and platforms that will allow us to engage with those audiences effectively, whether that's Facebook, Reddit, Nextdoor, whatever those applications might be. We want to figure out how we best communicate with different facets of the airport stakeholders. That improved communication consistency, we want looking for a sustainable long-term strategy that supports the airport. It increases our focus on proactive work and community engagement. So the mission of the airport has been always to serve as a vital transportation hub supporting general aviation, special aviation service organizations, which are things like FBOs, MROs, and things like that, and enhance aerospace industries such as like Pilatus. We want to foster sustained development and enhance regional economic vitality. We want to commit to being a world-class facility that's safe and innovative for aviation. That vision is how to be Colorado's premier regional airport. How do we derive economic growth? How can we innovate in aviation and airspace? And how can we provide a dynamic, sustainable solution for aviation community development? How do we also do that while upholding safety, efficiency, and the community's well-being? So it comes down to like three basic values that the strategic communication plan dives into. We have safety, sustainability, and innovation. We want to ensure the top standards for our users, staff, and our communities. We want to adopt energy efficient and environmentally friendly practices. And we want to leverage emerging aviation technologies, whether that's electric airplanes or eVTOLs or advanced urban air mobility, or what comes for the future. Those values, when we continue them, are collaboration, community growth, and excellence. How can we strengthen our partnerships with stakeholders in the community? How can we support economic development and reasonable land use? And how can we deliver outstanding services and facilities? Those are good values, but we need objectives on how we'd actually accomplish these things. And we want to try to build that through building connections, trusted transparency, and having a feedback process. We want to create a welcome space to engage with stakeholders and promote aviation advocacy. We want to be a reliable partner that people can trust for information. And we want to implement timely and effective systems for addressing feedback. To continue. For strengthening relationships, we want to collaborate with key stakeholders and local jurisdictions. And we want to share our story. We want to highlight the airport's role and the achievements that we make in the region, the nation, and locally. But to do that, we have different audiences. We have internal and external audiences the airport has to talk to, or that we want to talk to in a way that helps us be a better neighbor. Whether that's through RMA employees, airport tenants, pilots, or operator employees, such as the employees who are employed by those SASOs. We want to talk to community members, stakeholders, and partners or the media. We want to look at how we can identify preferred communication platforms for those groups. How do we align the tactics that we have with strategic objectives, and how do we engage efficiently with those audiences? Like I said, not every audience is in the same place. And so different social media or different engagement platforms are necessary, whether that's at city council groups, HOA meetings, or whatever that would be. The goal is to have the airport out there talking to people. So from a short-term perspective, in a 0 to 6 months, we're looking at a website redesign. And some of this is necessary anyway, but we want to take that a step further. One of the topics that we'll talk about later will be accessibility, and how, because of the way the Colorado laws are written for accessibility, a lot of the content that's on the website needs to get redone anyway. And so how can we make the website more collaborative? How can we ensure the website provides information in an easy way to access? How can we educate the public on airport operations or engagement opportunities? And how can we talk to the community? We want to make sure there's a feedback process where there's a streamlined way to collect and respond to community input. Right now, there isn't a lot of that. And so we want to try to figure out how the airport can do that in a way that doesn't expose us to litigation type issues, but also ensures the airport's being a responsible neighbor and being responsive in general. In the midterm goals for 6 to 12 months, we're talking about outreach meetings, develop a plan and schedule regular meetings with the community stakeholders and local leaders. Establish a constant process for sharing key reports and updates. On a long-term goal from 1 to 3 years, next. We have public initiatives that we'd like to underdo with collaborating with Jeffco Public Affairs to share the RMA story through large-scale campaigns or large-scale marketing initiatives, or just large-scale community outreach parts where we go to where the people are. We want to have an annual community calendar or meeting or airport celebration where we can talk about the different things not only happening on the airport, but happening in our neighboring regions. And also for annual reports, highlight successes and milestones for the airport and county leadership. And how can we take the data that we collect or that we would like to collect, and how can we share that in a format that helps us talk to the community and how it helps the community understand what the airport's goals, vision, and objectives are. So from process and implementation. For content, we want to define a message. What is our audience and how do we deliver that? How can we develop, review, and how can we develop and review content, images, or whatever? How can they qualify or quantify for effectiveness? How can we measure our success for our goals? For our initiatives, we want to plan campaigns, whether it's digital or traditional, and choose the platforms, timeline, and tactics that effectively execute that vision or that goal. How can we execute plans and initiatives for the airport that respect the airport, respect the community, and talk to stakeholders? How do we do that? For continuality, we want to ensure that we're being consistent, we're being sustainable, and that we have our brand aligned with being up communication. We want to be able to talk to people. That's really the key here, is the part of communication is being able to talk. And we haven't done a great job as the airport in talking to people. So how can we do that better? For report and measuring, we're talking about evaluating the initiatives that the airport has using certain KPIs or its cost or its engagement metrics. Like on Facebook, if the airport makes a fake Facebook post, and what does that engagement look like? How many people are responding to it? How many people are commenting on it? What are the people saying about it? We want to try to figure out how we do quarterly reporting and how we track and share metrics that are like the feedback that we get. What does the audience growth look like? What does engagement look like? What are kind of hits are we getting for different media sources? What is web traffic survey? And what does the attendance look like for the different meetings that we're having? When the airport goes to an event in town, like the Broomfield Days or whatever, and the airport has like a booth there, you know, how many people are we talking to? What are we talking about? We want to kind of look at what are the things that we're hearing. I think that kind of goes into the general communications plan. You have a copy of it in your agenda packet. It's not too long. I don't think it's too overly cumbersome. But it is a skeletal framework. And so it's just the ideas of how the airport can build upon this.
I have kind of a devil's advocate question.
Sure.
Back on your mission and vision, you're talking about being a vital transportation of sustainable development, enhancing regional economic vitality.
Sure.
How are any of these goals served by having flight schools on this airport, having this airport? Well, simply that question, having flight schools on this airport.
Sure, flight schools have been on the airport since the airport's inception in 1959. In 1960, when the runways were first laid, flight schools have been here since forever. Flight schools have been operating out of the airport for not only forever, but in the 1970s, operations were quite high, just out of the flight school operational aspect. In fact, there are pictures of the airport that have aircraft all over the place on aprons forever. The airport's always been a regional training hub for that kind of activity. Flight training is one part of an aviation industry. It's part of keeping longevity for the industry as a whole alive. So if we can have successful flight schools that are teaching pilots how to fly, those planes come back and they can become users of the airport. They become economic engines, not only for their own businesses or their own endeavors, but for the airport and the community as well. So to answer your question about is a quantity necessary? I don't know if 4 or 5 or 6 or 2 or 1 are a right answer for the number of flight schools, but flight training has always been an integral part of the airport's history since its inception.
It bothers me that you say it's always been here.
Mhm.
Because this airport is now surrounded by a whole lot of stuff that wasn't here back then. And it also bothers me that you think training pilots is going to affect whether company X, Y, or Z decides to base their company jet here, or whether JSX succeeds, or even whether Southwest decides to put you still haven't really told me what the benefit is of having flight schools at this airport now. Yeah, it was great back in the 50s. It was great when I first learned how to fly in Stormville Airport in New York, which is now a flea market. I'm just trying to understand the logic behind that, because I can't think of a way to explain to people that there's a reason for that. I can easily explain there's a reason why a Learjet takes off every 20 minutes.
Mhm.
I can't think of a reason to explain to people, surrounded as we are with other airports that are perfectly suitable for training. I can't think how to explain to people why they need to be here.
Well, I mean, that is a tricky question. So unfortunately, I suppose in that context, they have always been here. And I know that maybe is not the greatest answer, but they have. And the airport as it exists cannot necessarily pick and choose how many of what type of users exist at the airport, whether that's 1 flight school or 4 or whatever the number is. So flight training itself is a necessary part of aviation. I understand that's not necessarily a great answer as to why they have to exist here. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily know if I have a great answer for you today that would satisfy that question about why there are so many here. They exist because the market is here. The market exists because there's a number of flight pilots that want to learn to fly. There's a number of pilots that want to learn to fly an airline. A number of people that want to be recreational pilots, that want to be just private pilots. They come here because they like the atmosphere. They come here because they like the airport. There's people that come here from all over the nation to come and learn at this airport because they enjoy the scenery, they enjoy the operation of the airport. To say they shouldn't be here is also not fair either, because they have been here for a long time. You can't discriminate about the users of the airport. And yeah, it would be nice maybe if flight schools distributed themselves to other airports and to underutilized airports, but we don't have that authority. We don't have that control to say, no, not you. We welcome everybody. We try to control that in a way that is about leasing standards or how we can do that. But, to answer your question, why here? I mean, so long time people have asked that question, why are so many flight schools here? And the answer to that question has always come back to They enjoy it here. They like Denver. They like the airport. They like the atmosphere. They like the pilots that are here. They like to be part of that community. Um, it is an ever-changing industry, and the thing that drives us today is the demand for pilots, the demand for those things.
I see a comment from one of our board members online.
I should just note, like, comments not preserved for public record, so, John, if you want to comment.
John, will you read your comment? Because those comments do not go into record.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. No, I understand the points, and I think it's a valid one because we're going to be asked that a lot, and I'm glad it got brought up. I do feel that training is critical for the health and vitality of both the airport and the industry. And it's a lot more viable for that training to happen in a controlled environment such as BJC than a small uncontrolled facility. But please don't take that as a criticism. I think the question is a good one, and it's one that we have to always be prepared to answer.
And maybe this is getting down to math and data. I don't see us as having a disproportionate amount to comparable airports. Maybe we do. Do we have a higher proportion of flight school operations compared to Centennial or some of the ones that would be in, and that may come at another day, but
The comparison point would be
answering
that,
that
the
question.
comparison point would be that the Denver Metroplex has a lot of flight schools.
Yeah.
Whether that's a proportional number to wherever else, I wouldn't know, but you have to also remember that there are different factors that drive that. So whether it's training at a towered airport or training at an uncontrolled airport, whatever that might be, whether that student is looking to become an air traffic pilot and not have to go to college, and they're looking for a program that will take them from private pilot to airline as fast as possible, that's something the airport's been excelling at for quite a number of years. And so that's been happening here for a very long time. It doesn't mean that change isn't necessary or change doesn't need to come, but like, that is just the way it's been, is that the airport has had that. And in fact, you look at Boulder, you look at Erie, you look at Longmont, they're uncontrolled fields, and it's similar to the fact where when they're learning to fly, they come here because we have the resources, we have the infrastructure, and we have the airport for that flight training. So it's not just flight training here, it's flight training everywhere, and everywhere in Colorado. So it's not so simple as just saying, why here? It's just why everywhere, and the driving factor becomes the market is demanding that many pilots.
And anecdotally, I know more people that do flight schools and have their pilot license here than any of the 3 states I've lived in, and more hot, even neighbors and such. It's always surprising to me how many hold a pilot license.
Just for the record, I lived here, but I went to San Antonio to learn how to fly. And then I went to Memphis to learn how to fly for Northwest.
No, I think there's good thoughts behind, trying to encourage operations at underutilized airports. That's a valid idea. Like, how can we encourage that? How can we say to flight schools, how can we encourage the pilots? When you're doing those kind of sustained operations, does it make sense for you to go to those underutilized airports? I mean, those a fair comment. Like Greeley and CFO, those are maybe good places to go until you're a Greeley resident. You're wondering why it is there's this influx of planes coming to you from wherever they're coming from. CFO doesn't have a lot of planes around there, so it makes sense, except for CFO has its own problems with Denver. And so there's issues with approaching into CFO, there's issues with traffic around CFO. And so it's not as simple as just saying, yes, send them all there. It's a real regional issue where we have to come together as a region about how do we navigate this space and how do we keep the pilots in the system working efficiently.
No action needed on this. Any other comments or questions on the community engagement plan?
Jansen, I had one comment if you can hear me. Yeah, I think one of the comments on why aren't flight schools going elsewhere, I think a response to that is I can't think of an airport in Colorado that does not have in this region that does not have a flight school. I know for a fact that Longmont has several, Boulder has one, Erie, pretty much every airport in the near vicinity has flight schools. So just pushing flight schools elsewhere, I don't think is even a correct answer. I do think John hit it on the head that our infrastructure here from being a controlled airport with the size of the runways, just lends itself to being more safe for flight training. And that's one of the reasons. Just Colorado in general, the weather and the number of sunny days and other things also lends it to flight training. So I know outside of Colorado, Arizona, and Florida are other aspects of kind of the similar thing. But just saying that, hey, we don't want flight schools, they should go elsewhere, to me doesn't quite make sense because they are everywhere.
Thanks, Paul. Any other comments on it? All right, we'll move to the next item, the policy and bylaws follow-up.
I believe that's gonna be you.
All right, I'll take that one. I don't have slides for this one. This is kind of essentially a second reading of what we discussed last month. So in your packet, there's that same draft bylaws. I guess our recommendation at this point is if they're looking good to you, we'd recommend you consider adopting them at the January meeting. And then we can be back on kind of a regular cycle. We probably do have elections at some point, January or February. But yeah, we're happy to take any further comments you'd have or any adjustments you'd like to make, but we could bring back kind of a polished, ready for action version January.
I think the bylaws look solid.
My only question, Ben, goes a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, the appointments themselves on membership. I know the Board of County Commissioners has established that. Is that still under further review, or is that, so Article 3.01, those specific nuances, is that important to keep in there, or something we should keep on the radar?
So that's a good point, because that is also referenced in the board policy, and at some point we might want to tweak that as well. I don't know which gets tweaked first. Maybe I'll lean on Anthony for that one, but I know it's probably at some point. I think the last time I discussed this with the Board of County Commissioners is we would perhaps bring any recommended changes to the policy the next time we were appointing new board members, which potentially could have been not till next August. However, now that we have a vacancy, it might be earlier.
So my question would be, should we just reference theirs rather than rewrite it? Because if they change theirs, we're gonna, and that's something we can look at. I'm not arguing one way or the other, but rather than just referencing theirs, that could take a future step out.
So about 3.04
I'm on 3.01.
or 3.01.
I guess the question is, how does this intersect with the policy where there's kind of redundant language?
Well, my question about 3.01 is that it specifies two Jefferson County citizens. And so much of what this group has to deal with is related to points outside of Jefferson County.
And I think that's what the Board of County Commissioners was reviewing. We obviously don't have any sway on that. The Board of County Commissioners will determine that. It's more of, do we really want to re-specify it here? Or do we just want to reference up to it ultimately?
Reference to county policy.
Correct.
Okay.
So that when they change it, we don't have to then go through a bylaw change ourselves that conflicts with it. Okay, that's ultimately gonna, and that's the exact conversation that they're having as a Board of County Commissioners. And it's one that we won't have any influence or say on.
Yeah. So it's just another log on the fire.
Yeah. But to your point, I think
This shouldn't be so specific as long as the commissioners are specific.
But I think the commissioners would actually appreciate your all input on if there needs to be a change in the committee makeup. I think my proposal was that you change the ones that are required to be an airport influence area, which is very limiting, to be within the class delta of the airspace, which brings in jurisdictions like all of Superior, Louisville, a little bit of Lafayette. So at least allows for some membership. I think there's an outstanding question about can non-Jeffco residents even serve on this board, but I think that already exists. And so
It's a much
it's an
more,
asterisk, but
it's a much more sensible way of
yeah.
specifying an area for an airport than the name of the county that just happens to own it.
So I guess my proposal on that one would be when I feel like we're ready to bring that policy change or that revisit to the BCC, I would check in with this group about the change at that time, and or now we could reference this.
And then in terms of section 3.01, I just advise we take the same approach as section 3.02. And actually, with that, just to be expedient, I would just combine the two.
Exactly.
Appointments and terms will be in accordance with county policy.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That way we don't have to worry about future conflict.
Yeah, understood.
Any other comments, questions on the bylaws?
Yeah, can I just ask a general question? I'm just curious. I wondered if it would benefit or if it's not the appropriate place to discuss guidance on public comment. And I guess what I'm thinking is, I think people familiar with a lot of the different boards that take place, they're familiar with the method that we use, which is you listen to public comment, but it's not really supposed to be a dialogue. On the other hand, I think some who maybe aren't familiar with that probably perceive it as a little bit unresponsive and perhaps even rude that we don't answer. And I wonder if it would be helpful to everybody to have a little guidance in the bylaws about what public comment period is for and what our expectations are and that kind of thing. Or do you feel that it doesn't really belong in the bylaws, that it's more of a day-to-day procedure type of issue instead? It's only a question.
I think the bylaws is the appropriate place for that sort of thing. If you're advocating changing the current policy, I disagree with that. But whatever policy we have, bylaws is the kind of place where you put that sort of thing.
Does the county, because we follow the same public comments format as the county, do they have that explicitly written somewhere?
Some boards do.
Okay.
I can't say all. I do know some boards will actually lay out the explicit procedure for any given meeting. Obviously with the caveat that there can be discretion by the board members to change that procedure. But there usually is a, roll call, public comment, then we get into the agenda items. And then there's specifications as to what constitutes public comment. So there's usually a specification that it has to be something that's before the board to keep conversations relevant. And then there's usually a time limit or time period. And then there's also usually an overall time period just because we all want to go home at the end of the night. So public comments limited to 30 minutes or something like that. And then obviously be up to you all on how you structure whether public comment come before or after the agenda items. That is a item that you all could discuss.
And I know that's hotly debated, but I've had one where the public comments come at the end and everyone's always angry because you've already voted on it. And so I know it's sometimes frustrating because you don't get to hear the whole presentation, but if you speak after the vote, I promise you that's far more frustrating on public comment. So, I mean, I think that's why we kept it at the beginning while denoting that people would like to hear it and come back. But you all, I mean, I would agree with you. Bylaws is the place that we would put if there's a desire to see some structure and some formalization around it. Would we like to see some draft copy around that in the next rendition?
I think it might be helpful. I think we have to be, and no, I'm not suggesting a change in the policy at all. I think it might just be helpful to outline it a little bit. I also think it'd be important not to paint ourselves in a corner. I mean, if, for example, a citizen asks a question that's very easy for staff to answer and respond to, why wouldn't we do that instead of, pretending we didn't hear it? That doesn't make sense. But but I do think it might be helpful to have a little bit of verbiage in there about, as a general rule, here's the guidance for the public comment period.
If nothing else, at least have it in the order of business.
Right.
Yeah, from a historical perspective, some long-term attendees would remember we were a little more loose with how we did public comment, but when the roundtable started, we took this board and that board and kind of just said, we're following the county practice that the board of county commissioners uses, and that's why we have that agenda item, 3 minutes per speaker, 30 minutes max.
As a Robert's Rule of Order guy, that always drove me nuts that we didn't follow at the beginning.
Yeah.
You're right.
Now we're there, but yeah, we could formalize it and bring it back again.
Right.
So I just want some clear guidance then. I'm looking at section 6.02, which is order of business. I think that'd be the logical place for that to live. That's not my decision to make, that's the board's. It's just
Yes, I think
it's their conversation.
I would agree with you on that.
Okay.
I'm looking at it now.
I agree.
And keep it, no change in format. We're just putting that format in there. And so I think, it's 3 minutes per speaker, 30 minutes max. And I would like the ability, which I think we talked to, if we have so many sign up, that we can reduce that to 2 minutes to allow everyone to speak versus having to not allow people to speak. So I know we've talked about that flexibility before, as I was told, as long as you're consistent across the board to all speakers, you're able to make those.
Give people opportunity to speak and give everyone the opportunity.
Yes, so having that flexibility, but a hard cap at 30 minutes and then 3 minutes is a standard, 2 minutes if there's a vast number of people asking.
And I heard you voice your opinion on when public comments take place. I invite other.
I agree. I think the first is probably the better.
I agree with the first.
I do as well.
All right, anything else on bylaws?
Last one for me, just to make sure I heard correctly, for section 3.01, 3.02, we're just consolidating that down to what the county is recommending. And then Ben, did I hear correctly that in the future you will come back with possible updates to the structure? Is that correct?
That's correct. We had potentially we're gonna bring it forth in August of this year, but just couldn't get it ready in time. And then so the feedback we got was, well, make sure your board sees and weighs in on the thing. So we're gonna wait until the next time we go before the board with the airport advisory board topic.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll save my comments on that until that comes forward. But yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, anything else on bylaws? Okay, we will move to E, airport updates.
All right, the same updates as usual. There's been some minor movement on them. Actually, Kilo and Delta, we're cleaning up some of the loose ends in terms of the design of cul-de-sacs and the utilities and the easements we'll have to grant, and right-of-way vacation and dedications we'll have to work on. And then we have confirmed within this week that we will have to have a safety risk management panel. And then finally, we're still waiting on that United States Army Corps of Engineering determination that none of the waters in the study or in the project area are actual federal waters or US waters. So once we have that, we're looking at construction in 2025 at this point, and we'll give you updates as that moves forward. Basin 160, we actually had the safety risk management panel on this one on November 21st. That was the one thing that was kind of holding up this project. We actually have a pre-construction meeting tomorrow to talk with the contractor about when we can get this project started. And so likely January at this point, but if we hear really good news, it could be starting in a week or two. It'll just depend. So that one will be kicking off shortly at any rate. Unleaded fuel, we closed the qualifications-based selection that's been out on the streets since the end of October. And I now have a selection, internal staff selection, that will move to select a design consultant who will help us apply for the federal grant and move towards the bidding process to get a bulk tank in the fuel farm. At the same time, we're in discussions with our FBOs to determine, who's available and who wants to be able to actually take that fuel out of that fuel farm and put it in aircraft. So there's some minor details to work through with one or two of the FBOs, but we're optimistic at this point that we'll have a delivery partner in one of the two that's on the field currently.
Is it an excitement to deliver or is it a burden to deliver? Like when you say there's things to work through?
I think it's in between. I think they're probably like, yeah, they know this is coming and they would like to help the airport in terms of providing unleaded fuel to the tenants, but it's also another service that they have to provide. So they're working through, do they need additional staffing? What truck do they use? Can they use our truck? Like those little sorts of issues, but kind of the fundamentals are pretty sound. And then I think finally the Part 150 airport noise compatibility study, we were having regular project updates on this, and we just got the kind of request from the consultant in terms of all the data they would like to see. Some of the data the consultant gets themselves from the FAA or the US Census or things like that, but then we owe them some data both here at the airport and then done in terms of land use data from Jefferson County and surrounding jurisdictions. So we're working on gathering that all up. And then from a kind of a public point of view, people are probably wondering, like, when do we get to see what's this going to look like? That's going to be probably March or April of 2025 is when we're looking at the first public kickoff of the Part 150 study, where people can ask questions about what's this going to be like. And then towards summer, we'll start seeing noise contour modeling results, because that's kind of the bulk of the work of the consultant in the first year, besides the public engagement part. So more to come on that one. And any questions about any of those projects or anything
The
else?
public engagement, will that be here at the airport or will that be?
There will be 3 public hearings that are required as part of the formal process, and those, depending on how we forecast attendance, might have to be elsewhere unless, we borrow someone's large hangar. The scope of work for the consultants includes regular check-ins with this group. I think, can't remember if we recommended the first one in February or March to this airport advisory board. So that is in effect sort of a public meeting, or at least be a public presentation that the consultant gives to you all. And then there are also check-ins with the Board of County Commissioners, which will also be in a public meeting.
Any other questions on the business items? All right, looking out before we adjourn, I am showing that the next meeting should be Wednesday, January 8th. That is the second Wednesday. Everyone generally good with that? Keeping that, okay, all right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Got a second, we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks for joining us online, everyone. Appreciate having you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
File.